I've been bombarded by tons of unreleased content in future, and a lot of these are like characters coming up unreleased in terms of their kit and stuff like that as well. I don't release leaks publicly on this channel as well. It's against the terms of use for a lot of people or a lot of content creators who do so, but I still want to be here for you guys, so I'm going to be giving you analysis tips and tricks as well that I personally use and use in a lot of my videos as well to analyze whether a character is going to be good or not. You guys can make your own decisions yourself. I'm just going to be teaching you some tips and tricks that I personally use. Now, the first things first, out of all of the things in the game, the number one factor that determines whether a character is good or not for me will definitely be the character's versatility. And what I mean by versatility is whether the character can be fit into a lot of different situations, or if these characters are very specific to one particular character. In a gacha game that stretches out over like maybe 1 year, if you're playing for 1 year, 2 years in the long run, characters that are very niche but very excellent tend to not really shine as much as characters who are pretty decent, pretty good, that you can be fit into a lot of situations. So I know versatility is a very big word on its own. What do I mean by that? If you are a DPS character, what I would determine as perhaps something that is more versatile will be a character that, for example, can fit into many different teams, as maybe like you can be a main DPS or a sub DPS. You can play into maybe crit speed builds, you can play into damage over time builds as well, or maybe debuffing builds as well. So these kind of versatility and flexibility I would rate like slightly higher. Any characters who exhibits this kind of trait will tend to do a little bit better on its own. That doesn't mean to say that any pure DPS is going to be really bad, or any DPS that crits will be really bad. That's also not true. A character, for example, like IJULL, who is able to maybe do damage to a lot of damage to a single target, but also have a bit of flexibility to do a bit more AoE damage, is also an exhibition of versatility in their kit. A character that I think that will fit this role quite well in terms of this versatility function that's upcoming will be a character like Kafka, who can play both into a speed team, into a crit team, into a damage over time team as a main DPS or sub DPS as well. Very, very flexible and versatile a character to have. So that is the first category, the flexibility category. The second category, which I think will be arguably as important as the first category, is a category of the alternatives category, or competition, if that's a better way to put it as well. What this category means is if the place or the space that the character is in is already very crowded, perhaps this character is an AoE DPS or maybe a hunt DPS of a certain type, and there are already a lot of characters there doing a lot of single target or AoE damage in that category, that means the desire to like urgently pull this unit to fill out a slot in your team might not be as high as a lot of the other characters that might be released in future. Hoyoverse is releasing like 2 new characters every patch now in the early game, and a lot of us are definitely strapped for resources, and sometimes a choice have to be made whether we need them now, but of course we can always get them later on, and alternatives is mainly the barometer to decide whether you want it now or whether you can just hold off the urge to pull this particular character because your account can survive, and later on when they come their rerun, if you like this character, you can always pull them later on once you fundamentally build a solid account already. So what do I mean by alternatives and competition? Let me give you some examples. Typical example in the game that I've already done comparisons for will be like the Lightning DPS category, for example. There is Serval, who competes together with maybe Jingyuan, and Ireland to some extent competes with Serval also, because they are both 4-star and both lightning damage dealers. Although not perfect alternatives or competition, but they do fight with each other in the same space or do the relatively similar roles. So that is an example of a situation in game now that is getting more competitive. But also when Kafka comes out in version, well, who knows when, what version, some say 1.2, some say 1.3, but in the future version when she's coming out, she's going to be in this category as well, a lightning damage dealer kind of role. And if she is coming out and maybe you don't have enough resources, I think there's not much need to like fret about it, especially if you lose the 50-50. There's no point of like quitting the game or anything or being very upset. Those are just some things to consider. You can always get the character in a future rerun, and if there are already alternatives that exist in the game, probably it won't be like a very, very hit or miss for your current account as well. So that is category number 2 of alternatives as well as competition. Category number 3, I think, is probably the investment value of the particular character, and the word that I'm going to use to blanket it is like power creepability, or how power creepable this character is. What this means is if the character's kit generally falls in a space that developers know will sell very well and will keep dumping more and more sales or into that space, like keep power creeping it, there is a huge risk in terms of how desirable this character is, and it might be better to wait, for example, maybe in the rerun and so on and so forth, to determine whether that character is still good in future as well. Some categories that tend to be power creep more so than others would definitely be like the AoE DPS category as well as the single target DPS category. These categories generally sell better because everyone likes the big flashy numbers of characters that are doing the most damage. Healers and, for example, shielders tend to be a bit more boring. Just the general consensus of like normal players generally find defensive characters more meh, but the more damage big PP showcases more exciting. And naturally, if you are trying to increase the revenue of your company, selling more, you want to cater more of your characters, new characters, to more of the damaging aspect. So this natural tilt towards increasing revenue and selling characters that are in the meta will likely shift, for example, Hoyoverse to move in that direction. Also, one thing to point out is the Memory of Chaos definitely changes in terms of the buff every now and then, and this buff rotation will always be suited for the active character that's appearing. So another thing that talking about power creepability is characters who are not really affected by the buffs that the Memory of Chaos plays generally will do better or not. And one simple way to do this is by just at whatever point of time you're looking at the new character, you just look back at, for example, the 2 patches before and look at the buffs in the Memory of Chaos. If this particular character would have performed well in the past as well, this is a good barometer to tell you whether in the future, most likely these characters won't really suffer. For example, if it's very difficult to tell because when, let's say, for example, Zila and Jingyuan were released in a patch where Hunt and Erudition characters are with huge buffs and it's the first patch ever, it's very difficult to tell whether these characters will be very solid because we don't know what kind of buffs are there in the Memory of Chaos and what kind of nuances that the game developers will likely give in this very new fresh game. But subsequent characters that come about, we are able to do this like back testing, so to speak, to see how characters would perform if they were released in past Memory of Chaos as well as in the circumstance there too. That is something that we talk about a lot in the channel as well, so you can always just check back in terms of our team comp guides for that particular patch. You can always just click back if you forgot what the Memory of Chaos buff was. We have it all in storage as well. So go ahead and take a look if you're interested on the channel. We have tons of resources on the channel for all these kinds of stuff. But that will be basically category number 3, the power creepability of characters, and how I will use like back testing to kind of test to see whether this character is going to be good in future or not as well. Okay, next is category number 4. This is really more of like a bit more mathematical and we actually go in a bit more numbers. I think something that is very important to know is looking at the base stats of the characters as well as what element typing they are in as well. I have a spreadsheet that I'll put up on hsrguide.com, which is basically all the current characters in the game, and I'll sort them by their attack stat, their speed stat, their defense HP stat as of, for example, level 80, and I'll also sort them out on an average weighted basis that you can see something like this on the screen real quick. This will kind of tell you based on the stats what is the better function for a particular character. Sometimes looking at multipliers and how the character works alone is not enough. You want to look specifically at these like base stats because these base stats will kind of tell you their scaling and what they will definitely do well in. For example, if they are a HP scaling character but they have abysmally low amounts of HP, there's a red flag to be sounded. Maybe you have to over hyper invest in HP stats as well. And if, for example, they are relying a lot on speed but they have no speed at all, that is something to consider that it just doesn't quite tally out. And those are some things to investigate if you are really more in depth. If you are, for example, not really interested in doing like hard number crunching, you can always just go to the hsrguide.com or look at this chart here and then you just fill in where the new characters are and you can kind of tell where are they on the graph. Are they like above average, below average for a particular stat as well. So those are some things that I want to share in terms of looking at the specific of base stats. But other than that, 2 other things that of course you want to consider when you're looking at like raw numbers will be multipliers. Those are I think more straightforward, people will know more or less. And what multipliers are they? Are they scaling purely off of attack? Are they scaling off of defense and stuff like that? So that's the second part that I will look at and compare them, for example, to like existing characters in the game, like maybe Dan Heng's ultimate multipliers, and compare them, for example, if it's a Hunt character, you can just compare them to that, and you can kind of like get general sensing if you're not a beta tester in the game. And that's what I also use to gauge characters as well. So other than that, the third typing, of course, is the rarity of characters. There are a lot of charts already that I've done on HSR Guide and other channels, other videos on this channel that show like boss weaknesses and like the number of characters in particular typing. And for example, like if you are abundance or harmony, how many of the particular typing are there. Those are some things to consider as well. It's also falling like in line with the competition point that we talked about earlier on in this video. So those are like hard number crunching that you want to do. Now let's go on with category number 5. Out of all the categories, maybe category 5 should have been mentioned the first because it's the most important category as well. I think category number 5 is how they perform in the current game state, and I'll leave you a little bit of thought towards the end as well to consider. Category number 5 of how they work in the current game state basically is, if this character is released currently into the game, are they good, are they bad, do they need a lot of support, do they need a lot of resources to function as well, how do they actually fit into the team compositions. If it's closer towards the launch date, I probably will have a team composition video on that particular character on the channel. You guys can check it out if you're interested in my thoughts on like the permutation and combinations. It's a lot of characters, a lot of things to think about. I'll do all of the animation for you and you guys can just sit back, relax and think about it as well. But if I don't have those videos up, maybe it's like super way in advance and everything is still very speculative. Think about the particular character in terms of the kit. Who does it work well with, especially as a pair duo? Find that particular character that you think will work best with. For example, maybe Kafka and Sampo or Kafka and Serval. Once you form like a hybrid pair of these two particular characters, you are able to form teams around it much better and you can start to see where these particular characters will fall into the meta as well. So once you fall that in line, you'll kind of get a sensing of whether these characters will be good in the current game state or not, based on certain amounts of estimation. So up till now, all these 5 categories will help you determine how good the character is. But I think one secret thing that I will look out for personally, and this is like a special teaser for any of you who stayed to the end. I really appreciate you supporting my content. I'll definitely be doing more of such videos in future as well. If you guys appreciate it, do leave a like, comment and subscribe. But basically the teaser I want to talk about is all the information of upcoming characters actually gives me a gauge on where the game is going, and I think that is more important than the actual game state of the characters being released itself. Why is that a problem to me? Because if the game direction is changing, for example, the game developers are signaling a higher sense of power creep, that will mean that I will place more emphasis in terms of my character roster to think about characters who will likely not be replaced very soon, rather than over investing in terms of my DPS, and I could farm out for more options as well. And it also tells me in terms of where the game direction is going. If they are releasing like a lot more DOT characters in the game, I can kind of tell that maybe the direction of the game is going towards more of like a damage over time meta, which means that I want to build more characters in my roster that maybe suit their DOT. Or for example, if they are building characters that survive better at low life, I know that maybe there might be, for example, a case where the memory of chaos buff might rotate that way, and all these kind of things do matter as well. And other than that, I'm also always on the lookout for new mechanics that the game is adding into the game. For example, in other games like Genshin Impact, there's always, for example, bleed, a corrosion in the factor where they just gradually sap your buff. These major changes will shift the meta in a sense where healers likely will shift in demand and become more important as well, or maybe cleansers too. And in other games, in other turn-based games as well, for example, if they have a more emphasis in terms of maybe putting out a lifesteal element or a counter set as well, these would drastically change a lot of the prior content that has been released in terms of how guides have been made all across YouTube as well. So those are some important things that I look out for, especially when seeing these kind of upcoming characters, whether they're good or not, to give me a sense of where the game is going. And you found this video helpful, I'm just sharing with you my tips and tricks. I want to be here for you guys in all sorts of situations, in the legal boundaries as well. I don't want to offend Hoyoverse and step on anyone's toes as well. If you guys appreciate this content, do like and subscribe for more of such future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.